This week, Low Budget Binge unleashes road ragers, African myths, home invaders, and a host from hell. All done for a fraction of the budget of the major leagues. Get ready for the good, the bad, and the meh. Let's start binging. Welcome back to ML Miller Frights. I'm ML Miller. Before we begin, please do me a favor and punch that like button down below. Share this video with all of your social media addicted pals. Click subscribe to this channel and ring that bell for notifications. Low Budget Binge is where we venture down the path less traveled and look at low budget, no budget, and sometimes international films that never get that top billing you see with the usual Hollywood fare. I'll indicate in the review down below where you can find these films along with their trailers. Here we go. Tokolosh The Calling, aka An African Curse, is new on demand from Terror Films. It's directed by Richard Green and written by Richard Green and Arish Sirkissoon. Well, this is a fascinating train wreck of a movie. If it's not an example of a total lack of awareness and technical skill, it might be just a work of genius as Tokolosh The Calling attempts to thread a few different plots together in the loosest of connective tissue. It's very reminiscent of The Room. At the beginning of the film, one of the characters claims that she doesn't understand the story, but maybe if we experience it together, we might make sense of it. Well, I made it to the end, and nope, it doesn't make a lick of sense. The film begins without establishing who its characters are or how they're connected. For the life of me, I thought this was a story happening in two different eras, with one a present-day young woman recalling her tragic past when her family spent the summer in a haunted hotel and how it torments her to this day. Then all of a sudden it looks like it flashes back to tell that story with a young girl and her two parents moving into a hotel on the down season and realizing it's completely haunted. If you're thinking this sounds a lot like The Shining, then you're exactly right, as the filmmakers lift entire sequences from the classic horror film. Of course, reenacted by thespians without even a skosh of the talent Kubrick's cast did. What Tokolosh The Calling is a collection of images and sounds that only barely fit together sensibly. The camera rarely focuses on people while they are talking, and most dialogue is forgettable narration that attempts to be cryptic, but only serves to push you through to the next scene. Tokolosh The Calling feels as if it were filmed by one person who doesn't know much about filmmaking and then given to an editor to fix, but that guy doesn't know much about filmmaking or editing either. While there are some scenes that might make for some mild creep, most of the shock elements feel like they were lifted from an 80s goth band music video centering on creepy dolls, long, badly lit hallways, and the occasional bit of animation centering on the face of what looks to be a computer-generated monkey thing, which I think is supposed to represent the Tokolosh, the fiend from African folklore who shapeshifts and causes great horror to those it curses. Last year, a film called The Tokolosh was released, and while it was lo-fi, it delivered a chilling and personal story of African survival and folklore. This Tokolosh The Calling delivers none of that. I think the only way Tokolosh The Calling can be appreciated is by watching it as a cinematic curiosity, and that's about it. Seeing The Shining and renting a camera doesn't make you a filmmaker. Someone needs to tell the makers of Tokolosh The Calling this. This works as something to play in the background while doing anything else. Wired Shut is new on demand from 101 Films. It's directed by Alexander Sharp and written by Alexander Sharp and Peter Malone Elliott. After an automobile crash, writer Reed Rodney, played by Blake Stadel, has his jaw broken. When his daughter, Emmy, played by Natalie Sharp, arrives unexpectedly, he thinks she may be trying to reconcile their fractured relationship. But it turns out the resentment Emmy feels is deeper than Reed knows, and both Emmy and Preston, played by Betesh Fazlali, her boyfriend, plan on robbing and killing him. With his mouth wired shut, Reed is trapped in his own house and unable to call for help. Having watched too many true crime videos on YouTube, I've seen this scenario before, so having a child plan on murdering their parent is an easy premise to buy. Wired Shut is a boiled-down-to-basics thriller with all sorts of moments of strong tension and suspense. It sets up a simple and diabolical scenario, then lets the three characters simply tear each other apart. I have to admire the filmmaker for being able to pull off a small but potent little cat-and-mouse game. The setting of one simple home and the plans for the crime are all laid out clearly, and filmmaker Alexander Sharp makes it a ride that will surely cause knuckles to whiten. That said, because of the simple story, it does feel like the pacing of the film is off. There are some scenes that seem to go on for a really long time. The whole thing leads up to a fiery climactic battle, but the film is a bit of a trek to get there. One of the reasons this film feels uneven is because it seems they never really take advantage of the fact that Reed is unable to talk. There are plenty of scenes of Reed walking around silently, attempting to talk, but of course being unable to. But if you look at A Quiet Place, which uses the same kind of silent motif, that film builds to one climactic moment where a scream is necessary in order to save the family. An attempt is made to match that dramatic moment, but it doesn't hit its mark because that moment feels unnecessary, as grueling as it is. It feels a couple of passes to the script highlighting how to make good with the silence gag would have made this film really shine. Instead, it just kind of is by the end. Wired Shut is not a bad film, just one that has potential and doesn't quite live up to it. The acting is strong all across the board, and there's a moment of sheer lunacy towards the end that really works, where Preston, Fazlali, is screaming in a blind rage right into the camera. This shouldn't work, but it is quite chilling. There are a few other moments that work like this, but not enough, as I think the concept could have been explored a little deeper. This is a mild recommend for me. SUPERHOST is new streaming on Shudder. It's directed and written by Brandon Christensen. Claire, played by Sarah Canning, and Teddy, played by Osric Chow, run a YouTube channel where they visit bed and breakfasts and rate them for their dwindling fan base. After staking out a new place to report from, Teddy plans on proposing to Claire in a romantic spot. But they didn't plan on their eccentric host, Rebecca, played by Gracie Gilliam, who is proving to be one of the weirdest hosts they've ever encountered, which of course is great for their ratings. But as Rebecca shows her true colors of batshit crazy, Teddy and Claire begin to think her oddball behavior might just be dangerous. Filmmaker Brandon Christensen is on quite a roll. I really enjoyed both Z and Stillborn, and liked huge chunks of SUPERHOST. Christensen seems to be somewhat of a rising star in horror, creeping up that ladder to bigger and more potent horrors with every film he makes. While I don't think SUPERHOST is as good as Z and Stillborn, it still is a cut above most of the horror films out there. SUPERHOST basically is a gender-swapped and less found-footagey version of Creep, where the naive are stalked and terrorized by a strange and unpredictable person, someone at first thought to be amusing, but turns out to be quite deadly. In this case, it's Gracie Gilliam, who delivers an extremely strong performance as Rebecca. She's perky and chipper to a fault, but her glassy eyes hide some real, terrifying trauma. I love the way she kind of just zones out every now and then, making me wonder just what horrifying places she's going in her mind and what gruesome thoughts she's thinking. While her pluckiness is played for laughs here, it's the fact that she keeps this demeanor even when shit gets very real and bloody that makes her such a formidable villain. Gilliam looks like she could be related to stunner Alexandra Daddario, as they both have the same transfixing eyes and dark attitude. It was great to see Barbara Crampton in a bit role as someone who previously appeared on Claire and Teddy's show, received a bad review, and is now on a bit of a vengeance tear herself. After her fantastic performance in Jacob's Wife, she once again proves that she's still the genre star that she has always been. One of the main weaknesses of SUPERHOST is that the two leads, Sarah Canning and Osric Chow, who are fine actors themselves, just don't have any chemistry to speak of. Not only do they never even share a kiss, a loving embrace, or even a little snuggle, but the two look to have quite a bit of an age difference. This might not be the case, and I'm not saying that either actor is old at all, but they just don't seem to match up as a couple physically, emotionally, and especially sexually. This factors in a bit later in the story of Superhost, but it's obvious these two are a mismatched pair from the very beginning and makes it difficult to invest in the success of their relationship. And if you're not invested in the main relationship of the movie, you've got a problem. While I am grateful that Christensen didn't go for the found footage route with Superhost, I imagine at some time there might have been a push for this tired method of horror making to be applied. It makes me wonder, though, had there been that first-person POV attachment to the found footage flick applied, would it have been easier to buy into the lives and the fates of the two leads? As is, Superhost is a bit of a misfire, as I just didn't believe the leads to have any feelings for each other at all. Gracie Gilliam is definitely an actor to watch, though. See Superhost for her over-the-top and off-her-meds performance. Finally, there's Tailgate, aka BUMPERKLEEF. New on DVD from Film Movement, it's directed and written by Lodewijk Crijns. Hans, played by Jeroen Spitzenberger, and his family are going to visit his parents for the weekend for his father's birthday. Of course, he and his family are running late, so Hans decides to make up the time on the highway. What the family didn't plan on was running into Ed, played by Willem de Wolf, a serial killer who tracks down people who tailgate him on the highway and kills them wearing a hazmat suit and spraying a toxic pesticide at them. Ed relentlessly pursues Hans and his family on and off the road in order to enact his twisted form of justice. I wasn't expecting how much fun I was going to have with Tailgate. It's an over-the-top adrenaline rush of a film that pretty much starts its motors in the first few seconds and doesn't stop barreling down the highway until the credits roll. The film is basically a morality lesson that expands into a broader allegory of a man who thinks he's an adult, adulting around and doing adult things, but in actuality, he's just a small child in a man's body. It's a harsh tale that really cuts deep by the end, putting our lead, Hans, through the emotional and physical ringer. The story manages to be action-packed, but still quite deep with the way it communicates its message, unabashedly taking the side of the maniac motorist who is pursuing the family instead of the other way around. While this is a family in peril, the great thing is that as we get to know this family, we realize how awful they really are. It makes for an interesting watch as you begin feeling for the family who find themselves in peril, but as the momentum shifts, the true colors emerge, and it's hard to really find anyone worth your cheers. While this is not a Dick Maas film, it definitely has the same kind of offbeat humor, bombastic stunts, and over-the-top gore and violence to be a close relative to the iconic Dutch filmmaker. Lodewijk Crijns never lets his camera rest a second, creating some of the most harrowing car stunt work simply by focusing on the car and then whatever is in its path and then back again. Some scenes are sped up, but for the most part the chase scenes are real. The cars really do get that close to one another, and the speeds they drive are nerve-wracking. The highways in this Dutch landscape feel like something out of Mad Max, with barely a speed limit and no law in sight. This makes the motorway a reckless hazard zone, allowing Hans to rocket down the highway with very little care for the peril he is putting his family into. After pissing off Ed, the peril takes shape, and the exterminator sprayer Ed uses for a murder weapon is one of the more creative and palpable tools of death you're ever going to see. Still, despite the attention to action, Crijns never fails to take time for personality as well as building tension to feverish lengths. Tailgate, also known as BUMPERKLEEF, which I love, was remade last year as Unhinged, starring a very tubby Russell Crowe. While there are elements that are the same, the Americanized version pales in comparison. What feels like a second-rate falling down is glorious in the Dutch version by Crijns. Having seen both, skip the Russell Crowe version. It's not terrible, but ultimately forgettable. If you really want to occupy the edge of your seat for an entire film, seek out Tailgate. I watched the dub version, and the translation was both tension-laden and utterly hilarious. I honestly haven't had so much fun with a film this year as I had with Tailgate. This one is highly recommended for those who love some laughs and a little metaphorical death to their death-defying thrills and high-tension chills. That'll be it for today. Please chime in down below in the comments and let me know how on the nose or mind-numbingly wrong I am, or you can counter with your own review. So guys, you know how YouTube works. I'd love to be able to dedicate more time to this channel. I'm not monetized yet, so if you want to help me out, Remember to hit all the pertinent bells and whistles down below. Want some spooky comics to read? I have 2 new horror comic book trade paperbacks you should look out for. Both Gravetrancers and Pirouette, collecting never-before-published issues, can be found in only the finest of comic book shops. If you're looking for written reviews, you can find them on my website, mlmillerwrites.com. If you really want to show your support, I also have a Patreon page at mlmiller. Look for the link to my Patreon page down below. Thank you so much for your time, and take care.
You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside your reality.